Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Hughes Thrall. And as promised, I'm following the Pat Thrall Three-For-All with this Chordplay episode focusing on, the chords and rhythm work featured in the 1982 album Hughes Thrall, featuring Glenn Hughes and Pat Thrall. Definitely a dynamite album, very influential, definitely has a big cult following and very respected. So if you're a fan of Pat Thrall, Glenn Hughes, 80s rock, buckle up. This episode's totally for you. So to give you some backstory here as far as the Hughes Thrall project, in 1982, Glenn Hughes, had already left Deep Purple and he was kind of floating between projects and trying to figure out what to do. Pat Thrall had left the Pat Travers band, and I think Glenn Hughes had caught a Pat Travers concert, heard Pat Thrall play, eventually approached him about forming a supergroup, and that's kind of the basic origin as far as where the Hughes Thrall project came from. So as far as the musicians that you'll hear on that album, obviously Glenn Hughes on vocals and bass, Pat Thrall on guitar and guitar synth, the late great drummer Frankie Benally, from Quiet Riot, he's on a couple tracks. There's a couple other, session drummers on the other songs. There's a keyboardist too, but obviously Glenn Hughes and Pat Thrall are the focus. And there's definitely some great music flying around and great performances, from all these musicians. So all the music and examples in this lesson came from the Hughes Thrall album from 1982. Definitely a dynamite album that's kind of overlooked in today's world. A lot of people that are younger don't even know that album exists. You should definitely check that out. And this is Chordplay. So everything we're going to be looking at in this lesson, is rhythm-based and chord-based. But there's some great solos and stuff from Pat Thrall on there. And definitely, even though it wasn't a super huge hit, that album was very influential as far as showing people, or at least, kind of giving people an earful of what 80s bands could sound like with keyboard, drums, bass, and guitar. And, other albums by the Romantics and the Kinks and the Cars, along with that Hughes Thrall album, it did kind of shape 80s rock. So just a heads up. So with the opening, that's the song Got Your Number, the opening track from the Hughes Thrall album. And there's two guitars there, and I was using the MXR clone looper to kind of help me out. And guitar one is just playing muted power chords like this. Really basic stuff there. C sharp, power chord, C sharp 5. A5, and then a B5, right? And then guitar 2 is the one kind of spelling out all those sus2 chords, like this. C sharp sus2, and you're picking through it like this. So it's like the A to the B and then go back to the G string. Right? And then pick the exact same pattern on A sus2 right there. And then start with the same pattern on B sus2 right there. And then you want to do this high E. And that's kind of going backward there, high E, B, G to the D string twice. And then you just loop that with the power chords behind you, like that. And you put those guitars together and you've got Hughes Thrall magic right there. Starts right there and it goes to F sharp, right? Really cool intro part, and the first song on the album, and it totally grabs your attention. Like, hey, what's this? Next up's the heavy palm muted riff from the Look in Your Eyes, like this. And grabbed this because I thought it was cool that he keeps doing this CBA, like in the middle of those power chords there. You know, that's CBA right there. And then go to G5 and do the same thing. And then down to that F power chord, and then eventually switch up to G there. And then you do all that again. Cool riff. Next up's the change in the song Beg, Borrow, or Steal, like this. Something like that. So a D5 and then a G over B slid into that C5 right there. And then he basically starts shift sliding right there, that B to C back to the B, and then grab that G note. So that's really interesting because it's G over B to C5 and then G over B, and then you're grabbing G, right? Like G major. Like that. And then that G over B back to C5, and then you started again with that D5. And I just like the way they kind of sliding around that root note. Next up's the famous and highly requested Muscle and Blood, and it's something like this. For this, the low E open twice, and then it's like a D5, and then we're hammering on that E note there while we're still holding that A, like that. So that's really interesting. There's a lot of these like little partial twisted triads and partial chords and implied chords for this, but we're doing that. So it's like D5 and then hammering on that E note. That's like an E sus4 implied right there, like that. And then you're doing almost a similar thing right there. It's like a C sharp flat 5 to that top part of a G5 because you're hammering that C sharp to D right there. Like that. It's almost like the first one, but it's that shape instead of that one. And then right there, partial chords like the top part of an F sharp 5 to the top part of a B5. So like I said, all these like implied little pieces of chords there. And then start it again. And you're just going to play straight through that, like that C sharp flat 5 at the top part of that G5, 2 low E's open, and then a G5 up there. And then do the first riff again. And that last time right there, start it the same way. And then 2 low E's open, and then you're going to reach way up here and you're grabbing like the top part of this D5 right there. You could also think of that like an E7 sus4, I guess. Like that, but all the way through it. That riff totally kicks ass. Next up's a riff from the song Hold Out Your Life, and it's this. part, this is really cool. And eventually Pat throws like this kind of slapback delay effect on this riff. I tried to dial it up and I couldn't quite find it, so I just skipped it, but he's doing... And then right there he adds the delay effect. I think it's like overdubbed or like a second guitar part. But that's really cool because that F to that A flat and then that partial like C5 on top there. And I guess you could also think of this like an F, like sus4, like an F minor 7 like that. Like that. But you're doing those two single notes and then it's the double stops on top. Like that, like do the two single notes, one double stop, two single notes, one double stop, two single notes, two double stops there on the 3rd fret, and then the singles to the one double stop. And then right there the verse starts and he goes to an F sus2 and he kind of spells it out. Like spell out like the first 3 strings and then strum it. Like that. And then go to a C sharp sus2 and do the same thing. And then go back to F sus2 and do it again. And then right there strum an F sharp sus2 or a G flat sus2 I guess. And then right there it's like an F sharp sus4 to F sharp major. Or if you want to think of that as G flat sus4 to G flat major. But that's interesting too, and once again we got those sus2 chords. Okay, last but not least are those dreamy chords from the song Coast to Coast, and I could sit around playing this for an hour, like this. That's really cool. So that first chord, play the low E twice open, and then you're going to rake backward or strum backward, and that's an E major 7 like that. And then do that again. And you can see there it's half fretted, half open strings, right? That E, that G sharp, and that D sharp right there with the low E, B, and high E open. So there's E major 7 like that. Take that chord and move it down a whole step, and now you've got that D, F sharp, and that C sharp, and that's an implied E13 sus4 if you play that, like that. So you got that low E open for that E major 7, and then the low E open for that E13 sus2. sus2, I had to think about that. And then we're moving down here, and that's basically an E major 13 over E, because you're strumming everything. And then right there, take your middle finger off that A note and just play the open G. Now it's C major 7 over E. And that's really cool. And then this last change really complements what we just did there. So now that's an A sus2 over E like that, and you're strumming everything. And then hike that B up to a C, and now it's an A minor add 9 over E. And that's such a cool progression there. Here, and then like that. That's really cool. And then do the whole thing over. great on acoustic guitar too, just a heads up. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of Hughes Thrall, and I'm really just trying to flush this out of my system. I've had a Pat Travers mode that I've been in like for weeks, and then it shifted into Pat Thrall. I do have one more Pat Thrall related lesson idea that's kind of brewing. It's on the back burner. I'm trying to build it up, and that's going to be really cool. So if you see an additional Pat Thrall lesson, posted, click on it, because that one's going to be really cool and really different too. But what a great guitarist. Most people don't even know Pat Thrall's name, and most people don't know the Hughes Thrall album, and they should. They should definitely check out Pat Travers, Automatic Man, and some of this stuff featuring Pat Thrall, Meatloaf, and some of those albums and stuff. Great music, great guitarist, and just filled with really interesting ideas, the use of various effects, really cool licks and phrasing and solos, really cool, chord vocabulary and rhythm parts and stuff. I mean, all around a packaged guitarist, a great one. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.